Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current situation with the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And it is as follows. Following the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, an overwhelming majority of Palestinians believe that Hamas defeated Israel in the recent Gaza war and supports the continuation of rocket attacks if Israel does not remove the blockade on the Gaza. 79% of Palestinians questioned in Gaza and the West Bank said that Hamas had won the war against Israel, while only 3% said that Israel had won. 94% of respondents said that they were satisfied with Hamas's performance in confronting Israel. Asked whether they supported transferring Hamas's model of armed resistance to the West Bank, 74% in Gaza and 70% in the West Bank answered and said yes. If elections were held today, former Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh would easily defeat Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas by a margin of 61% to 32%. Meanwhile, in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had an approval rating of 82% among the Israeli public at the start of the Gaza war. By agreeing to a ceasefire with Hamas without militarily removing them from power, Netanyahu's approval rating plummeted to 32%. Furthermore, 39% of the Israeli public now considers the leader of the Jewish Home political party, Naftali Bennett, as being the leader of Israel's right wing. Only 28% currently consider Netanyahu to be the leader and representative of the right wing in Israel. Netanyahu said that the ceasefire agreement might have presented an opportunity for a diplomatic breakthrough in the region, although it was incumbent on the Palestinian Authority to give Hamas a divorce in order for that to become a reality. Today, there might be a new set of circumstances that enables us to act in a way that, on the one hand, we could advance our security interests and also launch a responsible diplomatic process on the basis of this new reality, Netanyahu said. However, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas would have to choose between peace with Israel and peace with Hamas, meaning that he would need to dismantle the unity government that he formed with Hamas several months ago. If Abbas chooses the path of peace, and I think that he understands today he needs to choose that over Hamas, because Hamas not only calls for Israel's destruction, but it also wishes to remove him from power, Netanyahu said. Hamas recently tried to remove Abbas from power in the West Bank, and Israel prevented it from happening. Abbas needs to choose between peace with Israel or Hamas, Netanyahu said. It's one of the two. I can only hope that Abbas gives Hamas a divorce, Netanyahu said. Israel Finance Minister Yair Lapid commented to Israel's ceasefire agreement with Hamas, saying, "We cannot and will not allow a situation whereby the ceasefire is the beginning of the countdown to the next round of rocket fire. Hamas knows the price they have paid, and they know the price that they will pay if they start firing rockets again." Israel had a major military achievement and has now moved to the diplomatic stage. The ceasefire is only the beginning of the next stage of the operation, that is the diplomatic stage, that must lead to the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. This is the only measure that will, in the long term, achieve peace between the two entities. In order to achieve this goal, Lapid is promoting the idea of a regional summit on the Gaza, which he said should focus on one thing: ensuring that rehabilitation of the Gaza takes place alongside with demilitarization of the Gaza. Lapid further noted that European and American leaders backed the idea of demilitarization during the operation, and now we need to work with them and with the Arab world to make that a reality. We need a regional conference with the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Gulf states, and of course the Quartet, which consists of the United States, the European Union, Russia, and the United Nations. On September the 22nd, the donor countries are scheduled to meet in New York and will commit aid to rebuild and rehabilitate Gaza. Israel must act before that to to avoid a conference where Gaza gets support and Israel gets nothing. Finally, Lapid urged more power to be given to the Palestinian Authority and said that such a move could help facilitate the renewal of peace talks with them. Israel Justice Minister Tzipi Livni and Israel's chief negotiator in the peace process with the Palestinians said that Israel must either renew peace talks with the Palestinian Authority or brace for a diplomatic backlash from the international community. In this post-war reality, either we resume negotiations with the Palestinians to reach a permanent agreement, winning the world's support, or we will find ourselves internationally isolated. Livni criticized Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, saying that he was difficult to negotiate with and took actions in the international arena which she does not agree with, like threatening to join the International Criminal Court. But she stressed that if the Israeli government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, refused to renew peace talks with the Palestinians, that Israel would face a diplomatic and legal intifada following the Gaza military operation. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said that he would not agree for Hamas to disarm. He said that Hamas's arms were sacred and demanded that the calls for disarmament also apply to Israel. Haniyeh said that Hamas has the right to have the necessary means to defend themselves. He charged that as long as Israel exists, so will fighting in the resistance against the Israeli occupation. Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman said that Israel should topple Hamas in the Gaza Strip and cause a more moderate leadership to come in power. In addition, he said that Israel should seek a sustainable solution to the conflict. Israel Finance Minister Yair Lapid indicated that Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will accept a request to hold a regional diplomatic conference of Israel and moderate Arab states in an effort to bring about Middle East peace. He said, "I discussed this issue with the Prime Minister and brought it up at a cabinet meeting, and there was a general feeling that this was a good idea." Lapid expressed confidence that holding a regional peace conference would provide the framework for a wider diplomatic horizon, saying, "I'm pushing forward the regional conference. We must and we will stay on the course which this government was established. That is a two-state solution with the Palestinians, and I think that we can advance it." Meanwhile, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas leader Khaled Mashal have agreed on a three-phase plan that would lead to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Mashal said, "We want a full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, and in addition, we agreed to the creation of a Palestinian state along the 1967 borders." He urged the United Nations to draw up a timetable for the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. The PLO will submit an application to the UN Security Council on September the 15th, according to Palestinian official Nabil Sha'ath. The plan calls for giving the United States a period of 4 months to draw the borders of the Palestinian state and win Israel's recognition for a Palestinian state. If the two sides agree on the plan, they will launch immediate negotiations with a defined timetable during which Israel would be requested to present a map showing its own borders. If the plan is rejected, the Palestinians, together with the Arab countries, would ask the United Nations Security Council to evict Israel from the land of Palestine. If this move also fails, the Palestinian leadership would resort to the third option, which is joining international treaties and conventions, including the International Criminal Court, in order to file war crime charges against Israel. Palestinian official Nabil Sha'ath said that taking the case to the International Criminal Court is conditional upon the United Nations Security Council response to the Palestinian request. International Criminal Court prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said that Palestine was now eligible to join the Rome Statute and file war crime charges against Israel. Initially, the Palestinian Authority sought to join the court in May of 2009. After 3 years of research and analysis, the International Criminal Court Prosecutor's Office determined in April of 2012 that since Palestine was an observer entity at the United Nations, that it could not sign on to the Rome Statute. Several months later, in November of 2012, Palestine's status was upgraded in the United Nations to a non-member observer state, which gives it legitimacy to join the Rome Statute, Bensouda said. Fatah official Mohammed Ashtiya said that the move to indict Israel in the International Criminal Court is ready. He said, "We are telling the Israelis in the international community that the Palestinians are very serious. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is presenting his plan for Palestinian statehood to the international community, and this time we will require a timetable for ending the Israeli occupation rather than going through another round of peace negotiations. He said that the Palestinians have not set a deadline for action on the matter, but believe that there would be more clarity on the issue by this November or December. Hamas has signed a pledge to back any Palestinian bid to join the International Criminal Court. Last month, Abbas said that he would not make a move without the written consent of all Palestinian factions. Musa Abu Marzouk, a senior Hamas leader, said that Hamas has signed the paper of support that Abbas had requested. A senior Palestinian official had said that Abbas likely would wait for the findings of a UN-appointed Commission of Inquiry into possible Gaza war crimes due this coming March before turning to the International Criminal Court. Turning to the International Criminal Court became an option for Abbas in 2012, after the United Nations General Assembly recognized Palestine in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, lands captured by Israel in the 1967 war. Palestinian leader Mahmoud al-Habbash shared some of the details of the plan. Israel and the Palestinians would be given 3 months to negotiate the borders of a future Palestinian state. The initial stage of the talks will be regarding the drawing of borders, he said. During this time, settlement construction will cease, and the fourth round of prisoner releases to which Israel obligated itself in March of this year will go forward. The Palestinian official said that the peace talks would be based on UN Security Council resolutions and UN General Assembly Resolution 194, which calls for a just solution to the Palestinian refugee issue. In the second stage of talks, the parties would focus on the remaining core issues, including the future status of refugees, control of Jerusalem, the settlement, security, and water. If Israel doesn't agree to the allotted time frame, the Palestinians will begin to undertake unilateral diplomatic and political steps in order to force Israel to capitulate to the peace process, al-Habbash said. These steps would include joining more international treaties and organizations, including the Rome Treaty, so that the Palestinians can file war crime charges against Israel at the International Criminal Court. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas will seek Arab League approval of his plan to be presented to Arab League foreign ministers on September the 7th. President Abbas wants Arab support so that in the future he can submit it for acceptance by the international community, al-Habbash said. Israel Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon opposed the diplomatic process with the Palestinians that would include Israel pulling out of the West Bank, saying that such a withdrawal would lead to rockets and mortar shells being fired at Israel's Ben Gurion airport. When considering a diplomatic process, it must be remembered that every instance of the Israeli army withdrawing from territory led to a takeover by terrorist elements, Ya'alon said. In any event, the United States has rejected Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas's new political initiative for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a Palestinian official said. The plan was presented by Chief Palestinian Negotiator Saeb Erekat when he met with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry recently. The United States rejected Abbas's initiative, saying that it was opposed to any unilateral move that could negatively impact the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Instead, Kerry has been talking with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about restarting Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. However, Netanyahu did not agree to this proposal either. Instead, Netanyahu insisted that Israel will not conduct peace talks with a Palestinian government backed by Hamas. Finally, Israel chief peace negotiator Tzipi Livni warned against the threats of Abbas, saying that Abbas will have to understand that a Palestinian state will not be established in United Nations institutions. Whatever the Palestinians can achieve, they can achieve in the negotiating room. We need a comprehensive diplomatic process, she said. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you the current situation with the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.